library at cspan.org. The U.S. House is gaveling in next for legislative work this afternoon. A handful of bills, including two measures, one dealing with the authority of the Labor Department to issue rules regarding financial investment advisors, now live to the House floor here on C-SPAN.
Will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Reverend Jack Hibbs, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills Church, Chino, California.
Shall we pray? Almighty God and Father, if it be your will that we be revived as a nation, hear my prayer. I ask that you to make us a thankful people, that we would bless you, the author of abundant mercies. Enable us to display a gratitude for all your goodness by endeavoring to fear and obey you. Bless us with your wisdom in this house, success in our battles, and let our prosperity be tempered with generosity. We pray that you would keep the United States in your holy protection, and that you would incline your heart toward us to cultivate a spirit of peace and obedience to both you and your government, that you would cause us to do justly and to love mercy, and to walk humbly in that love that was characteristic of your Son, the author of our blessed faith. Grant us this prayer through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
The Chair has examined a journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed S. 893, cited as the Veterans Compensation Cost of Living Adjustment Act of 2013, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
Without objection. The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
It's my honor to have my good friend and my pastor, Jack Hibbs, with us today to do the opening prayer. He's a senior pastor with Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. He has an incredible mission going in California. Plus, he has a global ministry on the radio going, and he does an amazing job preaching God's Word, and I'm just glad to have him here with us today. Thank you.
The Chair will entertain 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
My remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, constituents living across South Carolina's 2nd Congressional District have communicated very sincere concerns about the implementation of Obamacare. Sarah from North Augusta writes, quote, "People should not be punished because they grow old. One day we will all be in their shoes. It is preposterous that the government will be the ones to tell doctors what to charge for their services and what services can be provided," end of quote. Justin from Columbia says, quote, "The full implementation of Obamacare will be a disaster for America and the American people. Not only is it a direct assault on our freedom, it also puts the government in the middle of our health care decision, increases cost, and will inevitably lead to a single-payer system," end of quote. As the rollout of Obamacare continues to fail, Congress must act to address this problem now before it's too late and every American family falls victim to this unworkable law which destroys jobs. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
Time for the gentleman from South Carolina has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask the Senate to address the House for 1 minute and revise the extent.
Without objection, the gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commemorate the 80th anniversary of Ukraine's man-made famine and genocide. The great man-made famine was executed under Joseph Stalin's communist rule in an effort to eradicate Ukrainian cultural, education, and social institutions. Under Stalin's regime, the Ukrainian people were stripped of their land and grain and herded onto collective farms where they were eventually left to starve. What was once the breadbasket of Europe became home to forced famine that ultimately took the lives of over 6 million innocent men, women, and children. But Stalin's attempt to squelch the spirit and history of the Ukrainian people failed. And this Friday, the Ukrainian National Museum in Chicago will remember those whose lives were taken by this man-made genocide. The museum will also justifiably celebrate the strong and vibrant people and the nation of Ukraine that thrives today. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was stunned to see Russian President Vladimir Putin disparage American exceptionalism a few weeks ago. Simply put, Mr. Putin's human rights records leave much to be desired, including his treatment of Ahiska Turks. A distinct minority, they are severely persecuted by top Russian authorities and Putin's government solely for ethnicity and religion. During Mr. Putin's first term, the State Department designated Ahiska Turks as a group of special humanitarian concern. Since then, 12,000 Turks have resettled in America, including many in Illinois and in my district. However, 80,000 Ahiska Turks remain in Russia and routinely face severe discrimination and persecution in areas of their lives that we often take for granted. In an ethnic cleansing campaign, Stalin uprooted and resettled Ahiska Turks to Central Asia from their ancestral lands in Georgia in 1944. Unable to return, they have since been perennial refugees in Central Asia and Russia. This is the reality of Putin's Russia. In Russia, people are routinely and severely discriminated against, tortured, and even killed, and are economically and financially repressed. When given freedom to chase the American dream, these same Ahiska Turks have fulfilled their potential in less than a decade. I'll let my colleagues make their own determination about which nation is exceptional. Yield back.
The gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government announced yesterday good news for seniors. Their Medicare Part B premiums for 2014 will go up $0.00. It will stay at $104 per month. This is now the third year in a row that CMS Medicare Part B premiums have defied the trustees' prediction and come in lower than projected, and also defies the relentless campaign of misinformation that seniors have been subjected to that their Medicare Part B premiums were going to go up. Just on Friday, I was at a senior fair where a woman showed me an email, a chain email, that said that Medicare Part B premiums for 2014 were going up to $247 a month. Just a viral infection that has been out there that I've been confronted with at senior centers over and over again. Well, the facts are they're going up zero. Medicare Advantage premiums have stabilized. Medicare Part B premiums have stabilized. Prescription drug costs have gone down because of closing the donut hole. In every respect, the Affordable Care Act, since it passed in 2010, has been a winner for seniors and has helped strengthen the solvency of the program. Again, Medicare Part B premiums are going up zero for 2014. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commend an exceptional young leader from Rutherford County in Tennessee's 4th District. Elizabeth Etheridge recently received the Legion of Valor Bronze Cross for leadership, a testament to her strong work ethic and dedication to her junior ROTC battalion. As an honor student at Smyrna High School, Elizabeth is exceptionally well-rounded. She is ranked in the top 10% of her class as well as her JROTC grade. In addition to her service through JROTC, Elizabeth volunteers to give back to the community. Elizabeth is one of 6 Bronze Cross recipients competing against cadets from more than 200 schools for this great honor. Last month, Elizabeth was presented with the award at the Rutherford County Board of Education meeting. Elizabeth hopes to attend Vanderbilt University to study medicine and one day to join Doctors Without Borders. I wish her the best of luck in her future endeavors, and I know she will continue to make our 4th District proud. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, unfortunately, food stamps will be cut by $5 billion. We expected that. But what's worse is that even more deeper cuts could follow. Conferees start negotiating a farm bill this week, and billions of dollars, in fact $40 billion in cuts have been proposed by Republicans in the House. 10 times the amount of cuts passed in the bipartisan bill in the Senate. I've talked to dozens of people in my district who, since I've been here in Congress, have come up to me and said, you know, thank you for fighting to preserve the food stamp program. I've never told anybody, they say, but I received food stamps at one point in my life, so thank you for fighting. I'm afraid that many members of Congress simply don't know what it's like to be poor in America. These are real people, real human beings, and the cuts that we contemplate here are not numbers on a piece of paper, but it's cuts that would literally take food out of the mouths of people who are hungry. This is wrong, it cannot stand, and I urge my colleagues to fight to preserve this important program.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, another day goes by and the Obamacare train wreck continues. In 2009, President Obama promised that if you like your health care plan, you can keep it. It still promises that on the White House website and on the healthcare.gov website if and when you can get on that website. Mr. Speaker, when are these false promises going to end? What do I say to Gail in Maryland, who wrote me the quote, "I've been informed by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Maryland that I cannot keep my current coverage and will have to choose a new policy. I have to change my coverage and pay 53% more in premiums for coverage that is not as good. My husband and I will now have to pay at least $330 more per month for less coverage." Mr. Speaker, Gail and her family will lose the plan they like and will have to pay almost $4,000 more per year for a plan that delivers less. Mr. Speaker, American families deserve better than false promises. I yield back.
The gentleman from Maryland yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I want to talk to you today about the importance of responsible budget and in our government. Budgets are moral documents that reflect our priorities as a nation. For the sake of our economy, this Congress must turn back from the current brinksmanship and obstruction and return to the practice of negotiation and compromise. The proposed budget and across-the-board spending cuts to domestic programs are continuing to slam families, children, seniors, and persons with disabilities in the congressional district that I represent. Impacts to Texas include $9 billion to cuts in SNAP benefits over 10 years, almost $32 billion in cuts to health care for Texas seniors, and the loss of over 5,000 jobs for our Texas educators. We should focus on improving our education, strengthening old infrastructure, investing in advanced domestic manufacturing, and paving the way for the future. Let's show the American people that compromise and negotiation are not a thing of the past, and Washington can work together on their behalf. As elected leaders, we owe it to the American people to do the jobs we were sent here to do. I yield back.
The gentleman from Indiana seek recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you like your health plan, you will be able to keep your health plan. That's what the President said in 2009. But now, NBC News is reporting that this administration knew for at least 3 years that wasn't true. Now, millions of hardworking Americans in the individual market will not be able to keep their plans, even if they like them. People across the nation are experiencing sticker shock as they receive cancellation letters from their insurers and see their monthly premiums rise up to 400%. More people have received cancellation letters than have enrolled so far through all of the Affordable Care Act exchanges. The Affordable Care Act has proven to be anything but. It's time for the President and my Democratic colleagues to work with us to suspend this flawed law and work to fix it. We have to find a better way to deliver the reforms people really need because this law isn't working. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this week the House will consider a number of bills to honor and support our veterans. These are good bills, but they are not enough. A good and generous nation would also make sure a strong commitment is made to helping our veterans find work when they return home. Mr. Speaker, the current unemployment rate for post-9/11 veterans is 10%, and among young veterans between the ages of 18 and 24, it's 22%. This is unacceptable. We owe it to our veterans to support programs like the not-for-profit Helmets to Hard Hats, which partners with the Department of Defense, American businesses, and organized labor to help returning veterans prepare for work in the construction trades. We must also be sure that veterans have the ability to get the educational benefits they've earned without being constrained by deadline. As my legislation, the Veterans Educational Flexibility Act would do. Along with the Commitment to Nation Bill right here at home, we can create good American jobs that can't be outsourced and give back to those who have served our nation. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, just a week after the debt ceiling was suspended, the federal government added $375 billion in new debt. Without a limit on spending until mid-February, the federal government continues to borrow more than it takes in and spend at an outrageous rate. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, at a spending rate of $375 billion a week, U.S. debt would be over $22 trillion by the next debt ceiling deadline. This is unacceptable and unsustainable. Mr. Speaker, the reason we have found ourselves in a fiscal rut is because of outrageous, frivolous government spending. We have to come to the table and do more to cut spending in the next debt deal. This includes comprehensive tax reform to make our tax code less burdensome and changes to our entitlement programs to ensure that they are working as they should for future generations. American families know that they cannot spend limitlessly and never pay their bills. Our federal government should not be any different, and it's time to break our bad spending habits. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Affordable Care Act is more than a website. It's affordable, quality health insurance made available to everyone. And while my friends on the other side of the aisle like to keep talking about bad stories, there are some good stories about the Affordable Care Act, and I have one of them. It's Sarah and Joe, parents of 2 small children from Los Angeles, who've been working very hard every day to provide for their families while they were paying a high health care premium every month. Just last month, they were paying $1,259 a month for COBRA. And last week, they got on the exchange and they enrolled in a Blue Cross Silver 70 plan and are now paying more than $400 less a month. Less a month. Sarah shared with us, we're a family of 4 with 2 young kids, and regular access to doctors is a must for us. This plan does that. The recent problems people have encountered on the website are unacceptable, and they're being fixed. But let's not allow these temporary glitches to overshadow the life-changing benefits that the Affordable Care Act is bringing to millions of American families like Sarah and Joe. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, the gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People want to be able to trust their president. When he said, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan, many Americans believed him. But keeping the insurance you liked was never a real possibility under Obamacare. By design, the law requires every single new health plan and any existing plan that's been altered over the past 3 years to satisfy the one-size-fits-all requirements of Washington's central planners. That means millions of Americans are losing their current coverage, even though many like their plans, plans that were tailored to work for them, meet their specific needs, and fit into their family budgets. Unsurprisingly, though, when placating bureaucrats is the rule, patients certainly can't be the focus. The President did say, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan, but he simultaneously championed a law that replaced custom care with cookie-cutter care. Millions are being booted from their health plans as a result. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina New York seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, 1 year ago today, New York City and the entire eastern seaboard were ravaged by Superstorm Sandy. Entire communities were shattered, families were torn apart, and lives were lost. In New York City, the water level was so high it was covering cars. The nation's largest and busiest mass transit system closed down for the first time in a century. 8.5 million people lost their power, and some still do not have it returned, and 125 Americans lost their lives. The gratitude I feel for all those who helped their friends and neighbors is hard to express. There were a great number of heroes and heroines, and we sorely needed them. On the federal level, with the support of this body, FEMA has approved over $3.2 billion in funding for emergency work, over $1.4 billion in assistance to over 182,000 survivors. The Small Business Administration has approved $2.4 billion in low-interest loans, and the National Flood Insurance Program has provided more than $7.9 billion to policyholders. I would like to thank all of my colleagues and all those who stepped up to help during these difficult times. New York and others are deeply grateful. Thank you.
The gentlelady's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, over and over and over again, the President told the American people, if you like your health plan, you can keep it. If that were true, why then is Kaiser Health News reporting that health plans are sending hundreds of thousands of cancellation letters to people who buy their own coverage? The Kaiser report goes on to say that some consumers are now being forced to buy more costly policies. And if folks turn to the government for help, if they go to healthcare.gov, they'll be met with so many bugs and glitches as to make signing up almost impossible. Mr. Speaker, this is simply not fair. Nor is it fair that the President wants to find people who can't sign up using his own faulty website. House Republicans want to promote fair solutions that create more jobs for all Americans. That's how we're going to get our economy growing. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Nevada seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
The annual battle for Nevada between the University of Nevada, Las Vegas and the University of Nevada at Reno is not just a football game played once a year. It's a time-honored tradition that reflects the best of Nevada's sports rivalries. The victor not only wins bragging rights for a year, but also the coveted Fremont Cannon, which is painted in the winning school's colors. Now, for 8 long years, Reno has claimed these spoils, but this past Saturday, after a great game between Nevada's 2 outstanding universities, UNLV celebrated its first victory against the Wolfpack since 2004, and the long-anticipated return of the Fremont Cannon has come to Las Vegas. So congratulations to UNLV's coach, Bobby Hoke, and all of the Rebels for their 27-22 victory against UNR. You have made Southern Nevada proud. As part of a friendly wager placed on the game in honor of Make a Difference Day, my colleague Mark Amodei from Nevada's 2nd District and I will be performing a community service project wearing Rebel Red. Thank you. Go Rebels. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii seek recognition?
Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member of the House Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, I rise today to recognize the 1-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy and remember those who tragically lost their lives, as well as those continuing to rebuild from that destruction. In the years since Superstorm Sandy ravaged the East Coast, communities across the nation have suffered through new extreme droughts, storms, wildfires, and flooding. My home state of Hawaii is incredibly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. As you can imagine, a sea level rise is a real threat and concern for us. Earlier this year, Honolulu joined more than 70 other U.S. communities asking for the President to cut greenhouse gas emissions that are driving climate change and increasing Hawaii's risk of extreme weather events and sea level rise. When I was in the Hawaii legislature, I'm proud to say that we passed a bill that we were one of the first states to address the greenhouse gas emissions. As we reflect on this somber anniversary, I remain committed to ensure the people of Hawaii do have the resources to prepare, respond, and recover from devastation. And we must all remember it is climate change. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that the American people have fully understood what's been going on here for the last 6 weeks. The Republicans offered what? The Republicans offered to delay Obamacare as a compromise position in order to have the continuing resolution to keep our government going. That compromise was rejected. And we were called all kinds of names, and then we were told we were the ones that closed down government. But now take a look what's happened. Obamacare, this disaster that's taking place, the glitches, all of the problems we know now, Obamacare wasn't even ready. The President and the country needed the extra time in order to perfect Obamacare, but he would rather have closed it down, our government, rather than reach a compromise with the House of Representatives. That's what this is all about. We had arrogance on the part of our chief executive, unwilling to negotiate with the House. And what was the House offering? Time to delay Obamacare so it could work. Now the American people are not only suffered a closure, but now are suffering from an Obamacare that is not ready to be launched.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair would remind members to refrain from engaging in personalities. For purpose of the gentlelady from Connecticut seek recognition.
I ask unanimous consent to address the chamber for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to offer my congratulations and support to astronaut Rick Mastracchio, one of NASA's best and brightest and a proud son of Waterbury, Connecticut. Astronaut Mastracchio and 2 colleagues will launch on a mission to the International Space Station on November 6th, bringing along a package of geo-tracking tags from Waterbury Elementary School students. He will spend 6 months on the ISS, conduct several hundred experiments, and return to Earth in May. Astronaut Mastracchio attended Crosbury High School and received his Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from the University of Connecticut. He's a veteran of 3 space flights, having logged nearly 40 days in space. He continues to be an inspiration for students back home in Connecticut and around the world. We wish him the best of luck and a safe journey. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
This House 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just how workable is the Affordable Care Act, or the Unaffordable Care Act, as I'm often corrected back home in District 11? Well, let's take a look at some recent headlines about the launch of the new website. The Orlando Sentinel called it a hit-or-miss proposition. CNN quoted, "Americans are still having a tough time." Wow, what an understatement. Yes, we all know about how the Obamacare website, built with taxpayer dollars, is riddled with glitches. But is a bad website the only problems Americans face? Not by a long shot. How about those premiums that are shooting up all over America for affordable health care? Last month's mediocre jobs report shows our economy is still struggling, with higher insurance costs will not help hardworking Americans solve those problems. This is not what we were promised, but it's exactly what we're getting under the Unaffordable Care Act, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the 10th anniversary of Lindenwood University's campus in Belleville, Illinois. On November 3rd, 2003, Lindenwood acquired the 22-acre site of the old Belleville West High School. 52 students enrolled in evening classes that semester. In the decades since, Lindenwood University Belleville has grown into a strong and vibrant institution that contributes much to the richness of Belleville and to the higher education choices of Southern Illinois. Today, Lindenwood has over 1,000 full-time students enrolled in a wide range of academic programs, with hundreds more in graduate, continuing education, and specialized programs. This past spring, I had the high honor of addressing graduates at Lindenwood's first commencement exercise. I quoted Lindenwood University's mission statement to provide programs leading to the development of the whole person, an educated, responsible citizen of a global community. In its first decade, Lindenwood has done just that. I congratulate Lindenwood University Belleville on its 10th anniversary and wish the entire campus community much continued success. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, more and more news continues to come to light about the poor workmanship that went into the Obama administration's website for Obamacare. It's a problem, it's a mistake, and Americans are dealing with it all across America. The Associated Press reports, and I quote this, that folks in the administration saw red flags for months. And the Washington Post said that bureaucrats insisted on plowing ahead despite this known failure that would lie ahead. So, Mr. Speaker, we would ask a question. Why are the American people going to be required to be in a health care system other than the one that they chose? And the answer is because President Obama and Democrats passed a law years ago that is something that the American people do not want and were misled into. Premiums are skyrocketing, and some insurers are kicking people off their plan that they were on entirely. Mr. Speaker, Republicans have a plan for the future, and it allows people to have their own doctor, their own insurance company, and to make their own decisions. I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon. As a member of the House Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coalition, I rise today to recognize the one-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy and remember those who tragically lost their lives as well as those continuing to rebuild from the destruction. My constituents in Colorado understand the pain that comes with extreme weather events, having recently suffered from devastating and historic flooding and fires. The flooding killed 9 people, damaged or destroyed almost 18,000 homes and businesses across the state. Damage to our roads and bridges is estimated to be $450 million, and our cities and counties saw another over $170 million in infrastructure damage. Yet floods were not the only severe weather events in Colorado this year. Wildfires, numerous wildfires and droughts damaged and destroyed property and crops and took lives. I applaud the President for putting forth his climate action plan in an effort to implement meaningful policies that are slowing the effects of climate change. Congress should take further action to minimize the impacts of these natural disasters and to better understand our weather patterns. We will and we must work together to rebuild stronger and smarter and to better prepare for future natural disasters that are becoming all too common because of the real impacts of climate change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Connecticut seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized for 1 minute.
I want to share, Mr. Speaker, a letter I received from a constituent of mine. Her name is Mary Ann. She is from Milford, Connecticut. She is suffering from cancer. And she wrote to me during the recent Republican government shutdown. And she wrote, and I quote, I'm attaching a picture I snapped of the statement I received from my insurance company regarding my chemotherapy treatment of the month of July, which was one treatment, over $110,000. She goes on, I'm grateful that I have insurance right now, but it's COBRA. It's expensive. It runs out in 18 months. If the Affordable Care Act is not in place in 18 months, I will never be able to get insurance or treatment. This is real for me. It is life or death for me. And I am grateful that President Obama is not willing to negotiate with my life as this nation is held hostage by political terrorists. Mr. Speaker, I receive calls and letters like this every single week. The Affordable Care Act is already making a profound difference for individuals and their families. Those on the other side of the aisle who talk about it's not necessary, they have health insurance. They have it. Why is it that this body goes on to say no to health insurance for the millions of Americans who are out there? This body needs to stop partisan political games. Let the Affordable Care Act work for families. It is a matter of life or death.
The gentlelady's time expired long ago. For purposes of the gentlelady from California seek recognition. Without objection, the gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, as a member of the House Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, I rise today to recognize the one-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy and to remember those who tragically lost their lives, their homes, and so much of the communities that they knew. The storm's crippling impact still persists up and down the East Coast. While we cannot blame climate change for any one event, all of these natural disasters taken together are undeniable evidence of a looming man-made disaster. My constituents in California are also struggling to deal with climate change. In my state, 12 of the 20 most damaging wildfires occurred in the last 10 years, and crops have been decimated due to rising temperatures and water scarcity. We need to ask ourselves, what have we learned from Sandy? What have we learned from other disasters? And what can we do to prevent the next one? This problem has no party. It has no personal, more, I think, compelling issue than the fact that it does have a human problem, and it is the direst of consequences. It's time to put aside our partisan differences and start working together to address these issues.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose, gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. By the direction on the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 391 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 69, House Resolution 391. Resolved that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 992 to amend provisions in Section 716 of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act relating to federal assistance for swaps entities. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate equally divided among and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Agriculture and the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Financial Services. 2. 1 motion to recommit. Section 2. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 2374 to amend the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 to provide protections for retail consumers and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Financial Services now printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-23 shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Financial Services. 2. The further amendment printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution, if offered by Representative George Miller of California or his designee, which shall be in order without intervention of any point of order, shall be considered as read, shall be separately debatable for 20 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. And 3, one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 3, notwithstanding Section 1002 of the Continuing Appropriations Act 2014, a motion to proceed under such section, 1, may be offered even if the committee to which a joint resolution has been referred has not reported or been discharged, and 2, shall be in order only on the legislative day of Tuesday, October 29, 2013, or the legislative day of Wednesday, October 30, 2013, and B, a joint resolution under such section shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent. Section 4, on any legislative day during the period from October 31, 2013 through November 11, 2013, A, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved. B, the Chair may at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time within the limits of Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution, to be announced by the Chair in declaring the adjournment. Section 5, the Speaker may appoint members to perform the duties of the Chair for the duration of the period addressed by Section 4 of this resolution as though under Clause 8A of Rule 1.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman, my friend from Boulder, Colorado, Mr. Polis, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
During consideration of this resolution, all times yield for the purpose of debate only.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
House Resolution 391 provides for a structured rule of consideration of H.R. 2374 and a closed rule for consideration of H.R. 992. However, I think it's important to note that H.R. 992 is a closed rule really by default because the Rules Committee did not receive any amendments despite members having ample time to submit them. So we made sure in the interest of time that we're going to move forward on this important legislation, Mr. Speaker. So today's bills are technical in nature, but each carries a very important policy implication designed to strengthen our nation's financial services industry while simultaneously protecting consumers and providing more certainty for our economy. First, H.R. 992, the Swaps Regulatory Improvement Act, amends Section 716 of the Dodd-Frank Act to provide banks and their customers the flexibility to effectively manage risk better. Today, many banks and bank customers, such as utility companies and agricultural co-ops, use swaps as effective means to manage their business and to operate their cash flows in a safe and practical manner. Unfortunately, Section 716 of the Dodd-Frank Act would require banks and their customers to shift these practices out of a traditional bank model and place them in a newly created, capitalized non-bank entity. Such a change to current business models would create unnecessary instability in domestic markets and potentially restrict access to those financial services instruments. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke has said that such a move would weaken both financial stability and strong, prudent regulation. So, H.R. 992 would allow banks and their customers to keep the majority of swaps transactions in-house and to prevent needless financial instability. Additionally, it is important to note that despite what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle may say, this legislation only permits traditional swaps to continue under the current operating structure. All structured swaps, such as an asset-backed security and other riskier investment vehicles, would be required to be housed in non-bank entities. I believe this legislation represents common-sense ideas that allow for greater financial flexibility for consumers while ensuring that investors are not subject to unnecessary risk. The second bill, H.R. 2374, the Retail Investor Protection Act, aims to prevent potentially conflicting and costly definitions of fiduciary standards from being applied to broker-dealers and other financial services professionals. Currently, the Department of Labor is in the final stages of drafting a new definition of fiduciary standards for broker-dealers under the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, known as ERISA. This new requirement would dramatically change a long-standing business model and potentially diminish the ability of everyday Americans to access quality investment advice, meaning the broker that they choose. At the same time, the Securities and Exchange Commission, known as the SEC, is considering adopting its own uniform fiduciary standard for broker-dealers pursuant to the Frank-Dodd Act. H.R. 2374 would prevent the Department of Labor from issuing any new fiduciary standards before the SEC finalizes its new rule. In other words, we'd like for them to work together. This delay would prevent the two agencies from promulgating different and conflicting definitions that could prove difficult, if not impossible, for many financial service professionals to adhere to. Such a change in current business practices is a solution in search of a problem. So, current stability standards applying to broker-dealers did not play a role in the financial crisis of 2008. And Congress should not force American families to have to pay more, not only for legal definitions they do not need, but against their own common sense. Today, millions of Americans who save for retirement take advantage of many affordable investment options that broker-dealers provide. Changing fiduciary standards for broker-dealers would increase cost and decrease access to important investment tools, especially for low and middle-income families. I believe that H.R. 2374, as brought to the Rules Committee by the Chairman of the Financial Services Committee, the Honorable Jeb Hensarling from Dallas, Texas, provides the certainty and flexibility that Americans need for retirement and to plan for their future and for their own children's education while promoting a safe and equitable marketplace. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and yes on the underlying legislation. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the rule, which is a closed rule for H.R. 992, the Swaps Regulatory Improvement Act. It only makes an order one amendment for H.R. 2374, the Retail Investor Protection Act, and it would allow for this political game that we like to play, which is called a vote on the disapproval of raising the debt ceiling, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But what I truly object to here is the way that this body, this House, is only meeting for one full day this week. We came in yesterday evening around 6:30 p.m. We're meeting today, and it's my understanding for about half the day tomorrow. Most people in this country, Mr. Speaker, work a solid 40-hour work week. I don't know why members of Congress in this House, the expectations should somehow be they work 10, 12, 15 hours a week, call it a week, and go home, when there's many important things that we could be doing. Don't get me wrong, Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about today, and I agree with some of the bills under this rule and I disagree with others, is an honest day's work. We're discussing and debating important bills. Would that we were having these kinds of discussions for 5 days a week rather than 1 day a week, Mr. Speaker. While I disagree with this approach to getting very little work done that's important to the people of this country, this bill does make an order, H.R. 992, which I support. I think this bill is common sense. It modifies a provision of the Dodd-Frank bill, which many, including many of the bill's authors, like former Representative Barney Frank and Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke, regard as problematic. It corrects that. Many economists and regulators have noted that without this legislation, it's quite likely that certain swaps activity could be pushed out from the heavily regulated bank institutions, having the opposite effect of what many of us wanted to accomplish with the Dodd-Frank bill, an increasing cost to financial institutions. In fact, if we don't pass this bill, it could make our financial system more susceptible to systemic risk and reduce our international competitiveness, according to former Chairman Bernanke. And I'm confident that this bill will pass with a strong bipartisan coalition and does represent important work that this body will do. The underlying Bill 992 also ensures that federally backed financial institutions can continue to conduct risk mitigation efforts that serve commercial and hedging needs of their customers, while still prohibiting dangerous swaps that contributed to our economic collapse. I'm pleased to join my colleagues from across the aisle in making this important fix. Rather than repealing the law entirely, I wish, Mr. Speaker, that the approach to Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act was more analogous to this approach that we're having with Dodd-Frank. I think many of us who supported Dodd-Frank agree there's a number of changes that need to be made. There's, as far as I know, in the history of this institution, never been a perfect piece of legislation passed. It's regularly routine to have cleanup bills that improve and build upon what's been done. I wish that we could get there with the Affordable Care Act. I'm a co-sponsor of a number of bills that I think would improve the Affordable Care Act. I know that my colleagues from across the aisle are as well. I think it's time to get past this discussion of trying to repeal Obamacare and instead get to a discussion of how do we make it work for our country? How do we make health care work for our country? How do we make health care affordable for our country and build upon the successes of the Affordable Care Act and address the shortcomings of the Affordable Care Act? This rule also makes an order H.R. 2347, the Retail Investor Protection Act, which addresses pending rulemakings at both the Department of Labor and the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding the new fiduciary standards of care. And again, while the merits of this legislation are up for debate, under this rule, the House majority only allowed consideration of one amendment for the two underlying bills, and instead is sending us home early with half a day of work tomorrow, Wednesday, rather than staying through the week and allowing a more further discussion of additional amendments and other important topics, like replacing our broken immigration system with one that works for our country. More disappointingly, the little light workload this week of a day and a half is emblematic of how the next 2 months are calendared for this House of Representatives. There's only 19 days left of work for this House before the end of the year. The House is only in session for 2.5 days before we recess in a week. Again, I think that the American people expect and demand a minimum 40-hour work week from the people that they hire to represent them here in Washington. I think most people of this country have more than 19 days that they have to work in November and December. That's 2 full months, November and December, and yet we only have 19 days over that 2-month period that this body will be in session. And yet, there are critical issues that the American people are demanding that we act on. As an example, today is the 302nd day of 2013 that we have failed to bring to the floor a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Time is running short, and the need for a comprehensive immigration overhaul is growing every day. Even the United States Senate, hardly an institution that is prized for the speed with which it moves, has passed comprehensive immigration reform with a 2/3 majority, more than a 2/3 majority of the Senate. Now, I'm proud to be part of a coalition of House members, a bipartisan coalition that's introduced a bill very similar to the Senate bill that's replaced some of the border security language with House border security language. H.R. 15, the Border Security, Economic Opportunity and Immigration Modernization Act. This bill would create jobs, reduce our budget deficit, includes a pathway to citizenship, unite families. It would help reflect our values as Americans in our immigration laws, grow the economy, create jobs for Americans here at home, and finally get real about enforcing our immigration laws. Do you realize, Mr. Speaker, there are over 10 million people in this country illegally? When are we going to get serious about enforcing our laws and not making a mockery of them? This nation is a nation based on the rule of law. H.R. 15 reflects that commitment, as does the Senate immigration bill. It's time that we fix our broken immigration system rather than go home on a Wednesday and meet for 19 days in a 63-day period. This is a bipartisan bill, H.R. 15. We've been joined by several Republicans, Representative Denham, Representative Ross Leighton. We encourage my colleagues, I certainly invite my friend and colleague from Texas to join us as a co-sponsor of this bill that will allow us to create enforcement, a pathway to citizenship, grow jobs, and finally resolve our broken immigration system. And it appears, Mr. Speaker, perhaps I'm being paranoid, but it appears to me, Mr. Speaker, that perhaps leadership, and Mr. Speaker, leadership, as you know, controls what we vote on here on the floor of the House. Leadership, of course, being my colleague, Mr. Cantor from Virginia, my colleague, Mr. Boehner from Ohio. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, they fear that this bill would pass if it was brought to the floor. And yes, Mr. Speaker, this bill would pass if it was brought to the floor of the House. 29 Republicans have already publicly expressed support for a pathway to citizenship. Many more Republicans, Mr. Speaker, have privately expressed support for a pathway to citizenship. And it should hardly take courage to do so. Over 70% of the American people have expressed support for a pathway to citizenship. Regrettably, the only action that this House has taken on immigration has been one vote, which voted to undo the Deferred Action Program for childhood arrivals. It voted to deport dreamers. Yes, this House of Representatives actually voted to do that. Fortunately, it didn't happen. Democrats control the Senate and stopped it. The President likely would have vetoed it. It's his program that he started in the absence of this body acting. And by the way, in the absence of the House of Representatives taking on immigration reform, I hope the President expands deferred action. What other tools does he have at his disposal to address our immigration system if this body, the lawmaking body, refuses to actually solve the immigration issue? And if this body refuses to solve the immigration issue, the number of people here illegally will only increase. And this body, the House of Representatives, and the majority, the Republican Party, who won't allow us to vote on H.R. 15, will be responsible for more illegal immigration and having more people here illegally if we do not act now. Mr. Speaker, just this week, nearly 600 conservative supporters of immigration reform will storm Capitol Hill. From the faith community, the business community, the law enforcement community, an unprecedented coalition will be meeting with Republican members and is meeting with Republican members, demanding that they take action. We're talking about Partnership for a New American Economy, the Bibles, Badges, and Business Coalition for Immigration Reform, Forward.us, including strong support from the technology and business community, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Speaker. And yet, regrettably, the only immigration amendment that's passed this House has been to deport dreamers. Again, it thankfully didn't happen. The Senate and President were able to stop it. But that's the only idea so far that has been proposed and sadly, tragically accepted by this body for dealing with dreamers. We're talking about young people who grew up in this country, been through American schools, football team, cheerleader, prom, got good grades, played by every rule they knew. They were brought here when they were 2 years old, 5 years old. Frequently, they don't even speak another language. They want to get back to our country if only we will let them. And yet, this House voted to eliminate the program that allows them to work in this country. and would instead deport them back to a country they don't know anybody in and don't speak the language of, and deny them the ability to be legally in the only country they know, to make our country stronger. Now, that's action. The majority party took action on an amendment. They passed the amendment to undo the Deferred Action Program, but I refuse to believe that that's the action that Speaker Boehner had in mind when he said he wants to move forward and fix our broken immigration system. Regardless of what we do with the Dreamers, that's only a small part of our broken immigration system. There are many adults that are working illegally in this country because we refuse to enforce or fix our immigration laws. And that will continue until this House of Representatives chooses to change that. And the American people, Mr. Speaker, are fed up. That's why enormous majorities of Democrats, of Republicans, of independents, of men, of women, of every single breakdown that you have of the American people want to see the House of Representatives fix our broken immigration system. Would like to see us pass the Senate bill, H.R. 15, here in the House of Representatives, a bipartisan bill ready for the floor today and ready to be passed into law. The House majority needs to move a bill to the floor that includes a earned pathway to citizenship, border security, enforcement of our laws, meets the needs of the businesses, the technology sector, the agriculture sector, other important sectors that rely on an immigrant workforce. And yes, we can count the votes, Mr. Speaker. We can help Majority Whip McCarthy with his job. The votes for a pathway to citizenship, I'm proud to report back to my colleague from Texas, who I know is a member of Republican leadership, and my good colleague, Mr. Sessions. We can report back, and you can report back to Majority Whip McCarthy, that at least 29 House Republicans have publicly endorsed a pathway to citizenship as a component of immigration reform, the principles that are included in H.R. 15 and the Senate bill, and many more Republicans have privately committed their support. And yet we're hearing more and more about counterproductive measures that might be brought to the House. For instance, I've heard that there might be an effort to introduce the so-called SAFE Act in an immigration package, which would essentially turn undocumented immigrants into criminals overnight, creating an enforcement challenge. If we can't enforce our current laws, can you imagine trying to enforce a set of laws where there were 10 or 15 million criminals in our country? Now, it's important also to distinguish, Mr. Speaker, when we look at our immigrant detention centers, and we're talking about people who are here illegally who have committed crimes, not just the civil violation of being here illegally, we join with our Republican colleagues in seeking deportation and punishment. Whether somebody is here illegally or illegally, whether they have paperwork or not, if they ever commit a crime that harms our community, we have no sympathy for them, and we seek their full punishment under the law. But how can you enforce or punish people when you create a whole new class of criminals? We can barely punish the criminals we have. We already incarcerate more people as a percentage of our population than any other Western industrialized nation. Clearly, incarcerating and deporting more not only is not the answer, but would be a tremendous burden to the American taxpayer. Each deportation, Mr. Speaker, costs over $10,000 of your money. Over $10,000. Is that the solution? Or should we make sure that people who are working here pay taxes? Would you rather pay, Mr. Speaker, $10,000? Or would you rather accept their checks to make sure that they're paying their fair share to reduce our budget deficit and reduce the tax burden on everybody else to the tune of over $200 billion? Which is how much, according to the scoring of the Senate bill, comprehensive immigration reform will reduce our deficit. And we'll be happy to work with the Republican majority to use that $200 billion to reduce the individual tax rate. It's an issue that I've talked about with my colleague, Mr. Sessions from Texas. We would love to bring down those marginal rates. Instead of 39.6%, let's get them down to 38, 35. I think, you know, however low we can get them and bring down rates for everybody else as well. And I will address a question to my good colleague and friend from Texas, if we might be able to use the $200 billion in immigration reform to bring down the individual or corporate tax rate. I'll be happy to pose that question to my good friend.
Quickly, we believe there should be no more than a 25% tax on any American for paying their taxes. I thank the gentleman.
Reclaiming my time, And in that mix of the pay-fors might be immigration reform. That won't get us fully there. That's $200 billion, and I have to see the scoring on getting it down to 25.